For decades, Princess Anne stood as the unshakable guardian of royal discipline, but what she uncovered inside Balmoral Castle threatened to fracture the very core of the monarchy. Behind closed doors, King Charles III's private estate was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a stage for power, influence, and something far more dangerous. And at the center of it all stood Laura Lopez. Princess Anne had walked through the corridors of Buckingham Palace thousands of times, yet on that particular evening, something felt different. The air carried a strange stillness, the kind that settles before a storm breaks. She had come with a clear purpose, to discuss tightening oversight of royal estates with King Charles III, but fate intervened in a way she could not have predicted. As she stepped into a private office associated with Queen Camilla, her attention was drawn to something that immediately felt out of place. A thick, leather-bound file rested alone on the desk, absent of any official marking from the palace registry. Princess Anne was not a woman ruled by curiosity, but by instinct, and her instincts rarely failed her. The absence of protocol around that file was itself a violation. In a system where every document, every transaction, every movement is tracked and recorded, something unregistered meant something hidden. She approached slowly, her posture rigid, her mind already calculating possibilities. The moment she opened the file, the silence in the room seemed to deepen. What stared back at her was not routine paperwork, it was a pattern. Financial entries tied directly to Balmoral Castle. Payments that did not align with royal schedules. Luxury provisions ordered at times when King Charles III was not even present at the estate. Names of private companies, unknown to official royal channels, receiving substantial funds under vague descriptions like event logistics and consultancy arrangements. And then, repeated across multiple pages, one name appeared again and again: Laura Lopez. Princess Anne did not react outwardly, but internally, the realization struck with force. Balmoral Castle was not just any property. It was the most personal refuge of the royal family, deeply tied to the legacy of Queen Elizabeth II. It was never meant to be commercialized, never meant to host private dealings, and certainly never meant to be used by someone outside the core structure of the monarchy. Yet the documents told a different story, one where Balmoral had quietly become a venue for exclusive gatherings involving powerful business figures. As she turned each page, the scale of the operation became clearer. These were not isolated events. They were organized, scheduled, and strategically aligned with individuals who held influence in finance, real estate, and international investments. The timing of these gatherings coincided with major business approvals and negotiations happening beyond palace walls. To Princess Anne, this was no coincidence. It suggested something far more calculated, a system where royal prestige was being used as currency. What disturbed her most was not just Laura Lopez's involvement, but the implication that this could not have happened without protection. Access to Balmoral Castle, control over scheduling, and the ability to bypass internal auditing systems required more than ambition. It required authority. And that pointed to one unavoidable conclusion: Queen Camilla's influence. Princess Anne closed the file slowly, placing it back exactly as she had found it. Her expression remained composed, but her mind had already shifted from discovery to action. This was no longer a matter of internal disagreement. This was a breach of trust, of protocol, and of the very principles that define the monarchy. She understood immediately that if this information surfaced publicly without control, it could trigger one of the most damaging crises the royal family had faced in decades. But Princess Anne was not someone who reacted emotionally. She responded strategically. Walking out of the room, her steps were measured, her posture unchanged, but her resolve had hardened. She knew that what she had seen was only the surface. Documents could be hidden, records could be altered, and narratives could be controlled. If she was going to confront this, she needed something stronger than suspicion. She needed proof that could not be denied. That night, inside her private study, Princess Anne began what would become one of the most precise internal investigations in modern royal history. She did not involve official palace channels. Too many loyalties, too many risks. Instead, she relied on a small, trusted network operating quietly beyond the visible structure of the royal household. Every movement connected to Laura Lopez began to be tracked. Travel records, private meetings, unexplained visits to Balmoral Castle, all of it was documented. Within days, a clearer picture emerged. Laura Lopez had been hosting a series of private events at Balmoral, presented as cultural or charitable gatherings, but attended primarily by wealthy business figures. These were not traditional royal functions. They were exclusive, controlled environments where access to the prestige of the monarchy created an unspoken advantage. Guests were not just attending, they were networking, negotiating, positioning themselves within circles that normally remained inaccessible. Financial trails revealed even more. Payments were not routed through official royal accounts. Instead, they passed through intermediary companies, many registered in offshore jurisdictions. This created a layer of separation designed to avoid direct association with the palace. To Princess Anne, this was not careless. It was deliberate. Someone had designed a system that allowed the use of royal assets without leaving a clear footprint. The deeper she went, the more unsettling the pattern became. The timing of these events often aligned with key developments in business deals involving attendees. While there was no direct documentation linking decisions to the gatherings, the proximity was enough to raise serious concerns. It suggested that Balmoral Castle was not just being used as a venue, it was being used as leverage. Princess Anne sat in silence, reviewing the growing stack of evidence. Each document reinforced the same conclusion. This was not a one-time misuse. It was a sustained operation. And if left unchecked, it would not only damage the reputation of King Charles III but undermine the credibility of the monarchy itself. Her role had now changed. She was no longer observing. She was preparing to act. The next phase did not begin with confrontation. It began with silence. Princess Anne understood something that few inside the royal household ever truly grasped. Power was not exercised in public declarations, but in controlled timing. And what she had uncovered involving Laura Lopez and Balmoral Castle was far too dangerous to be rushed. If she moved too early, it could be dismissed. If she moved too late, it could spiral beyond control. So she waited. But while the palace appeared calm on the surface, beneath it, Princess Anne was tightening every thread of the investigation. Reports began arriving nightly, each one more precise than the last. Laura Lopez's movements were no longer casual observations. They were mapped patterns. Flights in and out of Scotland that did not align with any official royal schedule. Private vehicles entering Balmoral grounds under restricted clearance codes. Deliveries marked as heritage maintenance that, upon closer inspection, contained luxury catering supplies, imported wines, and high-end event equipment. None of it was accidental. What unsettled Princess Anne most was not the scale, it was the confidence. Laura Lopez was no longer acting cautiously. She was acting with certainty, as if the authority behind her actions could not be questioned. And that confidence suggested protection at the highest level. The name that lingered unspoken in every report was Queen Camilla. At Clarence House, internal staff movements began to reveal subtle but significant shifts. Requests were being approved without the usual chain of authorization. Schedules were being adjusted quietly. Certain security protocols around Balmoral Castle had been relaxed under the justification of private family use. Individually, these decisions seemed minor. Together, they formed a pattern that Princess Anne could no longer ignore. It wasn't just Laura Lopez using the estate. It was a system enabling her to do it. By the third week, Princess Anne had enough to see the full structure. Balmoral Castle had been transformed, carefully, quietly, into something it was never meant to be. Not publicly, not officially, but functionally. A private platform. An environment where influential figures could gather under the unspoken assumption of royal proximity. Where business conversations carried more weight simply because of the location. Where access itself became currency. And Laura Lopez was at the center of it. Not as a guest. Not even as an organizer. But as someone exercising control. The breakthrough came when Princess Anne received a detailed guest list for an upcoming event scheduled at Balmoral Castle. Unlike previous gatherings, this one had not been disguised well. Names on that list were not associated with charities, cultural institutions, or diplomatic circles. They were tied to major investment groups, international property ventures, and financial networks with active negotiations pending within the United Kingdom. This was no longer subtle. This was exposure waiting to happen. And Princess Anne realized something critical. If this event went ahead, it would cross a line that could not be contained internally. That was the moment her strategy changed. Until now, she had been observing, collecting, building a case. Now, she prepared to intervene. But not in a way Laura Lopez, or anyone else, would expect. On the night of the event, Balmoral Castle stood exactly as it always had, isolated, imposing, surrounded by the stillness of the Scottish Highlands. From the outside, nothing suggested anything unusual. No media. No announcements. Just a controlled environment, designed to remain invisible. Inside, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. Luxury vehicles arrived one by one, their presence carefully staggered to avoid attention. Guests were escorted discreetly through private entrances, bypassing the formal reception areas traditionally used for official royal functions. The banqueting hall had been transformed, lighting adjusted, historical artifacts repositioned, tables arranged with a level of extravagance rarely seen outside state occasions. And at the center of it all, Laura Lopez, moving with confidence, directing staff, greeting guests not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged there, someone who had authority. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like a private gathering, but to Princess Anne, watching from a distance, it was confirmation, because she was there, not inside the hall, not among the guests, but watching, waiting. Every detail had been anticipated, every movement recorded, every interaction observed. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about evidence. And Princess Anne knew that once she stepped forward, there would be no reversal. No quiet resolution. No internal containment. Inside the hall, Laura Lopez raised a glass, her voice carrying across the room as she spoke about strengthening relationships and leveraging legacy. The language was subtle, but the implication was unmistakable. She was positioning herself as a bridge between power and privilege, using Balmoral Castle as the platform, using the name of King Charles III as the foundation. That was the moment Princess Anne chose. No announcement, no warning, just action. The doors opened, not dramatically, not forcefully, but with quiet authority. Conversations stopped, heads turned, and within seconds, the entire atmosphere shifted. Because standing at the entrance was Princess Anne, not as a guest, not as family, but as something far more dangerous in that moment. A witness with proof. The room did not erupt into chaos. It collapsed into silence. Not the kind of silence that follows confusion, but the kind that follows realization. Because every person inside that hall at Balmoral Castle understood immediately, this was not a coincidence. This was not a visit. And it was certainly not a family matter anymore. This was exposure. Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone carried the weight of authority that no one in that room could challenge. She stepped forward slowly, her gaze moving across the guests. Men and women who only moments earlier had been speaking confidently about investments, influence, and access. Now, they couldn't even meet her eyes. Because in that instant, the illusion shattered. There was no private gathering. There was no royal association. There was only a misuse of power. And they had all walked into it. At the center of the room, Laura Lopez stood frozen. The confidence that had defined her movements just minutes earlier began to drain, replaced by something far more revealing: uncertainty. Not fear yet. Not panic. But the sudden awareness that whatever protection she believed she had might not be enough. Princess Anne didn't address her immediately. Instead, she walked toward a side table where documents had been carelessly arranged. Guest lists, printed schedules, discreet agreements that were never meant to be seen outside this room. Without hesitation, she gathered them, flipping through pages with calm precision. Each page confirmed what she already knew. Each signature strengthened the case. Each detail erased any possibility of denial. Still, she said nothing. And that silence became unbearable. Because silence, in that moment, meant one thing. This was no longer negotiable. Finally, Princess Anne looked up. Her eyes met Laura Lopez. And when she spoke, her voice was low, controlled, and absolute. "This ends tonight." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a decision. For the first time, Laura tried to respond. She stepped forward slightly, her composure returning just enough to attempt control over the situation. "This is a private event," she said, carefully choosing her words. "There's been a misunderstanding." But Princess Anne cut her off. Not loudly, not aggressively, just firmly. "There is no misunderstanding." That was the moment everything shifted. Because Laura realized this was not about perception. It was about evidence. Behind Princess Anne, members of internal security, acting under direct instruction, began moving through the room. Not to detain, not to create a scene, but to secure what mattered most. Documents, devices, records. Everything that could prove what had taken place inside Balmoral Castle. Guests began to step back, distancing themselves, some quietly moving toward exits, others remaining frozen in place, unsure whether leaving would make things worse. Conversations that had once carried confidence now dissolved into whispers. Because no one wanted to be connected to what was about to happen next. Laura Lopez, however, didn't move. She stood there, watching as the structure she had built, carefully, confidently, began to unravel in front of her. The room that had once amplified her authority now exposed it. And for the first time, she was no longer in control. Princess Anne approached her directly now, close enough that there was no distance left to hide behind. "You used this estate," Anne said, her voice steady, "as if it belonged to you." Laura tried to hold her ground. "I had authorization," she replied quickly. "This was approved." But again, Princess Anne didn't allow the narrative to form. "Authorization," she repeated, "does not extend beyond the crown." That single line carried everything, because it drew a boundary Laura could not cross. Not legally, not institutionally, not even symbolically. And in that moment, the reality became unavoidable. This was no longer about internal discipline. This was about legal accountability. Princess Anne stepped back slightly, her expression unchanged, her decision already made long before she entered that room. "The matter will proceed," she said. "Not may proceed. Not will be reviewed. Will proceed." Laura's composure broke, just slightly. Enough to show that she understood what that meant. Because once it moved beyond the palace, there would be no protection. No quiet resolution. No control over the outcome. And as Princess Anne turned to leave, carrying with her the documents that would define everything that followed, one truth settled over the room like a final verdict. What happened at Balmoral Castle was no longer hidden. It was now a case. And it was heading somewhere far more dangerous than any royal scandal. It was heading to court. By the time Princess Anne returned to Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere inside the royal household had already begun to shift. Not publicly, not yet, but internally, something had changed. Because the documents taken from Balmoral Castle were no longer just evidence of misconduct. They were proof of a system that had crossed into dangerous territory. Inside a private chamber, away from advisors, away from staff, Princess Anne placed the collected files in front of King Charles III. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what sat on that table did not require explanation. It demanded acknowledgement. King Charles did not reach for the documents immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the surface, as if delaying the inevitable might somehow soften what he was about to see. But Princess Anne stood motionless, her presence steady, her message clear. This could not be ignored. Finally, he opened the first file. Page by page, the reality unfolded. Financial transactions tied to private events. Unauthorized use of estate resources. Guest lists that carried no connection to official royal functions. And at the center of it all, the repeated involvement of Laura Lopez. King Charles's expression did not break, but it changed. Subtly. The kind of change that comes not from shock, but from recognition. Because what he was seeing was not just a breach of protocol. It was a misuse of something far more significant. The authority of the crown itself. "What is this?" he asked quietly. Not because he didn't understand, but because he needed to hear it said. Princess Anne did not hesitate. "Balmoral Castle has been used," she said, her tone precise, "for private influence and commercial access. No emotion, no exaggeration, just fact." The room fell silent again. But this silence was different. It carried tension, conflict, a decision waiting to be made. Because for King Charles, this was not just about Laura Lopez. It led directly to one unavoidable question. How had this been allowed to happen? And the answer was not comfortable. There was no direct accusation spoken aloud, but the implication was clear. Access to Balmoral Castle, control over scheduling, freedom to operate without scrutiny. None of it existed without influence. And that influence pointed toward Queen Camilla. King Charles closed the file slowly. His hand remained on the cover for a moment longer than necessary. Because this was no longer a distant issue. It was personal. For years, he had trusted that the balance between family and institution could be maintained. That loyalty could coexist with authority. But what lay in front of him now suggested something else. That trust had been used. "What do you intend to do?" he asked. Princess Anne's answer came without hesitation. "This cannot remain internal." That sentence changed everything. Because once it moved beyond the palace, control would shift. Narratives would no longer be managed. Outcomes would no longer be negotiated. King Charles understood that. And for the first time, the weight of the decision became visible. If he protected Laura Lopez, he risked the credibility of the monarchy. If he allowed the case to proceed, he risked something far more personal. Princess Anne did not push further. She didn't need to. The evidence had already done that. Minutes passed. Then, slowly, King Charles reached for his pen. The action itself was small, but the implication was not. Because what he was about to authorize would move this from a royal matter to a legal one. His signature came without ceremony. No announcement, no statement, just ink on paper. But that signature carried consequence. It granted Princess Anne the authority to proceed, to coordinate, to escalate, and most importantly, to take the matter involving Laura Lopez beyond palace walls. The decision was final. But there was one detail left unresolved. When it came to Queen Camilla, King Charles did not include her in the authorization. Not because the question wasn't there, but because that decision was not one he was ready to make publicly. Yet even without it, the direction was clear. The moment the authorization left that room, everything changed. Because this was no longer contained within the royal family. It had crossed into something far more serious. The kind of situation where titles no longer shield actions, where influence no longer controls outcomes, and where, for the first time, Laura Lopez would not be answering to the crown. She would be answering to the law. The morning of the hearing arrived under a heavy sky over London, the kind of gray that seemed to press down on the city itself. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited, reporters lined the barriers, and speculation moved faster than facts. But inside, the atmosphere was entirely different. Cold, controlled, unforgiving. Because this was no longer about rumors, or palace whispers, or internal disputes within the House of Windsor. This was a legal proceeding. And at the center of it, Laura Lopez. She entered without the confidence that once defined her presence. The same woman who had moved through the halls of Balmoral Castle as if she belonged there now walked with measured steps. Her expression restrained, her gaze lowered. Across the room, officials prepared documents. Evidence gathered. Records verified. Everything that had once been hidden behind private doors was now laid out in a place where nothing could be controlled. From the rear of the chamber, Princess Anne stood in silence. No expression of victory. No sign of emotion. Because for her, this was never about punishment. It was about responsibility. As proceedings began, details emerged with precision. Financial records tied to Balmoral Castle. Unauthorized gatherings presented under the image of royal association. A network of transactions routed through external entities. Each piece added weight. Each detail removed doubt. There were no dramatic interruptions. No desperate denials. Only the steady unfolding of facts. And with each passing moment, the reality became unavoidable. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a misuse of access. In a separate section of the chamber, Queen Camilla remained seated, silent, her presence marked not by authority, but by distance. For the first time, the position she held offered no protection to what had already been set in motion. And somewhere beyond the courtroom walls, King Charles III carried the weight of a decision that had changed the course of his own family. When the session concluded, there was no sense of resolution, only consequence. Because the damage was not limited to a legal outcome. It extended to reputation, to trust, to the very perception of the monarchy itself. As people began to leave, Princess Anne remained for a moment longer, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. She had done what few in her position would ever choose to do. She had placed duty above family. And in doing so, she had drawn a line that could not be erased. Outside, the world waited for answers. Inside, the truth had already been established. Because in the end, this was never just about Laura Lopez. It was about something far deeper. What happens when power is used without limits? And who is willing to stop it? So now the question turns to you. Was Princess Anne right to take this all the way to court, even if it meant exposing her own family? Or should this have remained behind palace doors? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective matters. And if you want more deep, high-stakes royal stories like this, stories that go beyond headlines and into what really happens behind the walls of Buckingham Palace and Balmoral Castle, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the next video appearing on your screen. Because the next story might be even more shocking.